I try to take people at their word when they say they're pro-choice. I don't get into a big argument with semantics about them. Okay, you think this should be a choice. Well, how about this? We now know, and we're still learning more, but we know that about 2/3 of all abortions are not what the woman really wanted. All right, so that's not a choice. And then about 10% of women say that their abortions were coercive. That means that someone was threatening them. Think about that. If 1 out of 10 abortions is coercive, what does the phrase pro-choice really mean?
From the front lines of America's pro-life movement comes a story that spans generations. Eric Scheidler grew up in the shadow of Roe versus Wade, watching his parents, Joe and Ann, lead the charge for the preborn. What began with stuffing envelopes and marching at rallies has become a lifelong mission. Standing against Planned Parenthood, organizing protests that have shaken the nation, and given a voice to mothers, fathers, and children too often ignored. In today's conversation, Eric and I dig into tragedy of false prenatal testing and how it pressures families into abortion. The reality of coercion that robs women of real choices, and the radical agenda of groups like ACOG that want to erase the baby from the picture. We talk about what Pro-Life Action League is doing on the ground, from training sidewalk counselors to leading nationwide protests and demonstrations, and how every one of us can step into this fight. Eric continues his family's legacy as executive director of Pro-Life Action League, showing what it means to take courage and take charge, speak truth, defend life, and build a culture of life. This is Living Pro-Life. Well, Eric, welcome to the program. I'm glad you're on.
Glad to be with you today.
Well, Eric, there's so much to talk about with Pro-Life Action League and the work that's done. Started there in Chicago and now expanding across the country. But one of the things we were talking about before the program was this thing called fetal diagnosis and how important it is to kind of get in there and understand why that's important and how that impacts abortion.
Well, we now know that hundreds, if and possibly even thousands of babies are dying every single year because of false prenatal testing. These tests are becoming more and more common early in pregnancy. And the real tragedy is they're treating every pregnancy like a potential problem. So they're positing in women's minds from the first prenatal visit they have that this is a healthcare hazard. Things are likely to go wrong. Here's all the different ways things can go wrong. And then they start this regime of testing on perfectly healthy moms. What happens when you test a whole lot of perfectly healthy moms with tests that are not perfect? Because no tests are perfect. You get a lot of false positives. In a lot of those cases, those false positives are figured out and those babies are born perfectly healthy and fine, but sometimes they're not. And the reason we know this is because pro-life parents or parents who they haven't even thought about abortion before as a moral or ethical question, but they don't want to do it for their own child. Yeah. And they choose to carry a baby to term and the baby is perfectly fine. So we know that there are cases in which healthy children, healthy moms are being led into abortion by a medical industry that doesn't seem to value the life of the unborn child. They're not seeing the baby as a patient. And so if there's any chance of a problem, they will recommend abortion. And very often, patients are not prepared for this information. You were telling me you and your wife received notice that you should get some more testing for Downs in an email. This is not good healthcare. Parents need to be sitting with a practitioner, ideally face-to-face, when this issue even begins to come up. So we've been working with a neonatologist named Robin Perucci, who has worked for many, many years in the field of taking care of these children who have disabilities when they're born and who have difficult pregnancies, and in sharing some of her stories and trying to just get the word out so that parents know that they have other options, that there are organizations out there to help them if they get a negative diagnosis. There are support groups to help them if they're being pressured to get an abortion. They should just know that they have rights to information. They have a right to a second opinion, and they shouldn't be pressured into abortion just because there's some kind of a chance. And again, this is preying on people because people go into pregnancy, they have dreams and fantasies of this perfect family. And a lot of that, is getting muddled and dashed when physicians who are not aware of the psychology going on here, you start to push abortion on them and push testing on them. So that's been something the Pro-Life Action League has been trying to talk about. And we've even gone so far as to protest at the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists meeting. We're working with the folks at the Pro-Life, APLOG, the Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, to talk about ways that we can push back against ACOG. Because that group of secular obstetricians and gynecologists, the vast majority of them just want to deliver babies and want to take care of moms. They don't know how radical the organization is. You know, the executive committee of this organization is actually considering taking the baby off of their logo.
Gosh.
Wow. You know, I hope they do, actually, because it'll expose who they really are. Like if you're an obstetrician and you've forgotten about the baby, man, there's something going wrong here. Because the mom hasn't forgotten about the baby. And the vast majority of doctors haven't forgotten about the baby.
Right. There are two patients. From the day one, there are two patients, both mom and baby. Also, there's many European countries who said they've completely eradicated Down syndrome, not because of some kind of miracle, but because of abortion. Do you know anything more about that?
Yeah, there was big news about the state of Iceland declaring that they've eradicated Down syndrome. Well, all they've done is convinced every single parent in Iceland to kill their children with Down syndrome. You know, we could solve all kinds of diseases if we just killed everybody with that disease. Maybe this is something that the medical community is looking into for other conditions too.
Well, I know, off to a bit of a different topic, and you mentioned it earlier, some clients are being coerced, pressured, forced, whether by well-meaning medical professionals or even devious medical professionals, but also boyfriends, mothers, those around
Bosses.
them.
The father of the baby who's, maybe married to somebody else. Women are under tremendous pressure to get abortions. And this is part of the reality of abortion that too few people know about, including many of our friends who call themselves pro-choice. I try to take people at their word when they say they're pro-choice. I don't get into a big argument with semantics about them. Okay, you think this should be a choice. Well, how about this? We now know, and we're still learning more, but we know that about 2/3 of all abortions are not what the woman really wanted. She describes the abortion, and this is years later, they describe the abortion as somebody else's idea that was kind of pushed on them, or as something that, they chose, but they would have preferred to become a mother. They would have preferred, to maybe get some help with their rent and not have to go through with an abortion. About a quarter of women describe their abortions as unwanted. All right. So that's not a choice. And then about 10% of women say that their abortions were coercive. That means that someone was threatening them. It could have been threatening them with, breaking up or kicking them out of the house. Parents sometimes illegally threaten to kick their children, their minor daughters, out of the house if they don't get an abortion. It's illegal, but they still do it. Sometimes it's a gun to the head. We've heard some horror stories of women who've been forced into abortions in various ways over the years. Think about that. If 1 out of 10 abortions is coercive, what does the phrase pro-choice really mean?
Right, exactly.
If 2/3 of all abortions aren't really a free choice, then most people who are calling themselves pro-choice are actually pretty much a lot closer to being pro-life, if we can get them to see that connection. I think this is a tremendous area of building common ground. And there's also the evil of it. I mean, the flat out wickedness of pushing women to get abortions. And then the woman has to suffer with the guilt and the shame. The woman who cuts my hair has a good friend whose mother pushed her into getting an abortion when she was 17. All these years later, her friend still feels guilty about it. And she's parenting now a disabled child who's an adult now. And institutionalized from a very young age. And she thinks that's God's way of punishing her.
Wow.
For going through with an abortion that her mom was pushing on her. That's just one story. And there are so many stories like that people need to hear, that those who call themselves pro-choice need to hear, but that also pro-lifers need to hear. Because I think sometimes in the pro-life movement, we also have a distorted image of who's getting abortions and why they're getting them. There's this idea out there in the culture that abortion is always a full-throated choice that a woman makes independently. I'm a woman, hear me roar, I'm going to get an abortion. And both pro-choice or pro-abortion and pro-life people believe that.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be, when I was growing up, every politician said it should be, quote, safe, legal, and rare, right? I mean, there was this idea that, of course, we don't like abortion, but we have to tolerate it somehow, some way. That's not the case these days. These days, we're talking about it being, shout your abortion, and the more abortions, the better, these kind of things. Unfortunately, that's actually, with their narrative. Like, their narrative is finally consistent with what they're actually doing on the ground.
Yeah, that's kind of nice in a way, that they're not pretending anymore that they, have any kind of problem with abortion. But their efforts are pretty feckless. I mean, I really encourage listeners to visit that website, Shout Your Abortion. I think it's shoutyourabortion.com. You can very easily find it. The stories there are not stories of women assuming, the mantle of freedom and, manifesting their purest self through getting an abortion. These are stories of regret and conflicted emotions. And you'll read stories there of women who say, I've cried every day since my abortion 2 years ago, but it was still the right choice for me. Well, part of your brain is saying that, and part of your brain is saying something else. They're very deeply, deeply conflicted. And I think that's because of what abortion is.
Yeah.
These are not stories that we concocted. It's not pro-life propaganda. These are women telling their true stories. And what comes through is so much sorrow, so much regret, so many mixed feelings. They're not allowed to grieve for this. They're not allowed to suffer over their abortions. They're supposed to feel like everything was fine. And that alone is a tremendous burden for many women. Even if they don't have even if they don't explicitly feel like that was a bad choice I shouldn't have made, they're not even allowed to explore some of the mixed feelings that they have. It's so sad.
Well, some of our listeners are in states like Illinois, where abortion laws are either non-existent or completely ignored in the state of Illinois, but also in California, New York, Massachusetts, and other very pro-abortion states, or at least from the legal perspective. So what can pro-life people do at some of these state houses to actually move the needle to help protect these women?
I don't know how much there is that you can really do at the state house at this point. It's always good to be having conversations with legislators and preparing the ground for future legislative efforts. I mean, here in Illinois, we are still fighting defensive battles. We're fighting to protect the conscience rights of physicians and nurses and others who are pro-life and don't want to be involved in abortion. We're fighting to protect employers from having to be involved in abortion. I'm in a lawsuit right now over insurance coverage and that issue here in Illinois, requiring abortion coverage. So it's very defense focused here, trying to keep things from getting worse.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think when we talk to regular people, when we're not in the state house, but we're just, at the church picnic or, at the school play, these are opportunities to just highlight how out of whack things are in a state like Illinois, especially with this data that we now have about unwanted abortions. And I wrote a piece with Charlie Camozzi and Monica Snyder last year called Pivoting to Unwanted and Coerced Abortions, a Manifesto, published at Public Discourse. And, we go through the data and go through some of the information about intimate partner violence and so forth. When we share this with people and say, hey, look, the reality is that, poor women are being pushed into abortions that they don't want. And yet our government is helping them, is helping the coercers. Yeah. Our government is helping the aborters. Our government is helping those who are shielding child predators with its incredibly, radicalized pro-abortion approach to the issue of pregnancy for poor women. I think if we can create a sense of understanding for how poor women are not just all looking for abortions, what they're looking for is housing, rent check, flexible work hours and things like this that would make it possible for them to be mothers, the mothers they want to be. So I think, as our governments get more radicalized, it actually does open the door for us to just step back and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. Why are we pushing abortion so hard? Why are we calling for women to come from all over the country to come here for abortions? Why are we shielding abortion providers? Why are we making it so that women who come from out of state and get botched abortions here have a hard time getting lawyers to defend them and protect them and hold the abortionists accountable? Because our government cares only about abortion and nothing else.
Yeah. Well, I know Pro-Life Action League has really set the stage for a lot of the pro-life groups around the country and had the courage to go out and stand on the sidewalk and do some pretty incredible things at the time. I know your father was very heavily involved in that as well. So tell us a little bit about, why Pro-Life Action League is so important to even just having this discussion here today. And then what's the future of advocacy around the country?
Well, the Pro-Life Action League was founded in 1980 by my father, Joe Scheidler, and he had been working in the pro-life movement already for about 7 years by then. Right after Roe v. Wade, he got involved. And he saw the need for more direct involvement by pro-life people. And this is something that, Coalition Life is centered on, is putting people to work as sidewalk counselors and advocates outside the abortion facilities. My mother and father realized that there was a real need for this. My dad had marched with Martin Luther King Jr. back in the 60s, calling for civil rights. And that vision of regular people taking responsibility, for a big cultural, social, moral, an ethical issue of their time, and stuck with him. And he'd been doing, more and more activism during the 70s. So in 1980, he founded the Pro-Life Action League. And our mission is to put regular people to work, to make them advocates for unborn babies. That's everything from, sidewalk counseling outside the abortion facilities. We're big advocates of that and trainers of that and push for that. It's chapter 1 of my dad's book, Closed, 99 Ways to Stop Abortion, sidewalk counseling. But we also, we lobby at state houses. We call on our legislators to not vote for bad legislation and to vote yes on good stuff. We train people to be good advocates in the public square. We've got an incredible tool called Sharing the Pro-Life Message. It's this tiny little handbook. It fits in your pocket. And we created it because we needed it. We needed something when we're out on the street and we're having conversations. We bring pictures out there. We show people what abortion looks like, what it does to the baby's body. They have questions. We're able to answer those questions because we created this handbook. Sharing the Pro-Life Message, an incredible tool. I wish every single pro-lifer in the country had a copy because it provides real succinct answers. They're all right there at your fingertips. We do large nationwide demonstrations. We've got a big event every September, the second Saturday of September, called the National Day of Remembrance for Aborted Children, where we go out to the burial places of aborted babies. There's about 50 of those around the country. And we go to hundreds of other places where there are memorial markers set up for these children to remember them by. And we go out and we pray and we mourn and we give permission to families that have lost children to abortion to come and share their stories. And that's been very, very important for people. Again, so many women and men, mothers, fathers, grandmothers are grieving over abortion and not feeling like they're allowed to. A day like the National Day of Remembrance for Aborted Children gives everyone permission to mourn over these children, which after all, Jesus asked us to do. Blessed are they who mourn. They will be comforted.
Well, Eric, tell us more about how we can learn about Pro-Life Action League and where we can get involved.
Well, you can find us online at prolifeaction.org. We're available on most social media channels with the handle at Pro-Life Action or at Pro-Life Action League. We're pretty easy to find. We have a mailing list. We send out regular updates on both local and national issues. So you put in your zip code, and if there's something happening locally, we can let you know about that. And we are also always looking for people to work with us as local leaders. One of our biggest efforts is, recruiting people who will work in small and large towns all over the United States, whether it's praying at abortion facilities or, protesting at Planned Parenthood facilities. We have several, I mentioned the National Day of Remembrance for Aborted Children. We also do a Way of the Cross for victims of abortion on Good Friday every year. We have a Christmas caroling program that we do at abortion facilities. We have national protests. Like earlier this year, we did a big nationwide defund Planned Parenthood rally, a couple of those, which have successfully led to Trump signing into law a bill that would strip a year's worth of funding from Planned Parenthood. We're fighting that in the courts. We're hopeful that will be enacted in October, and Planned Parenthood will have to close, we hope, scores of facilities around the country. So we're always ready to put you to work. We're ready to help you, to recruit people in your community to care about this issue, whether you are just a pro-life advocate who wants to do something, or whether you've got a group, maybe you've got a rosary group or you've got a sidewalk counseling team and you want to up your game or think of other things you can do. The Pro-Life Action League is there to help. And we're real experts in meeting people where they're at. We provide templates for press releases and emails. Well, we've got modules on every aspect of, we call it pro-life basic training, on how to identify property lines, how to talk to the police, how to manage it when counter protesters show up. Anything you can think about in the pro-life activism sphere, we're there to teach you about it and help you get better at it. and scale you up so that, you could start by running a very small prayer vigil of 10 people, and you could build up to, doing an annual protest with 1,000 people showing up. We've seen people rise to all levels, and we're there to help.
Awesome. Well, we were listening to Eric Scheidler, Executive Director of Pro-Life Action League. Thanks for being on the program.
It's an honor to be with you, and keep up the good work. We're real fans of Coalition Life, and excited to see all the things you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you.